Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in from across the continent today for another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. As many of you know, this is one of our busiest weeks of the year. We're not only near wrapping up the school year, but we are blasting off in style with some incredible programs with speakers coast to coast to coast across Canada and truly around the world. It's World Oceans Week, it's World Environment Week. They're all blasting together. I think we have over 30 programs this week alone, so a big welcome into you as an amazing audience and to all our speakers as well. Today, I'm so thrilled to kick off our Environment Week festivities with Marion McGraw. She's joining us in Jasper National Park talking today about Wildfire. This is one of our most popular programs we've done over the last few years, and it's so nice to get to bring it back and talk about wildfire, how it happens, what we're doing to combat it, a little bit of the history, and what it's like in one of Canada's most special places in Alberta's national parks. So without further ado, Marion, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome back to the broadcast one last time this year, and so nice to have you back.
So nice to be here, Jesse. Thank you so much for having me.
It is always such a pleasure for our audience. And in fact, our California crew just joined us live, which is fantastic. Our YouTube crew is there as well. So nice to have such a big audience. Marion's going to be calling upon you throughout today's presentation. So get your trigger fingers at the ready to answer some questions. And I'll turn it over to you to blow lines with our first slide here on wildfire.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So as you know, thanks, Jesse, for introducing me. My name is Marion. Hello, bonjour. And I'm a Public Outreach and Education Officer with Parks Canada. And for those of you, I know we've got some friends joining from California, some folks from Ontario, some people from all across the nation. Just to give you an idea, here's a map of our wonderful national parks and national historic sites across the nation. And to give you a little bit more of an idea where Jasper is, if you might not know, here we are in the western part of Canada, and Jasper is one of the mountain parks nestled in the magnificent Rocky Mountains on the western edge of Alberta. So that's just to give you a little bit of context about where you can find Jasper National Park. Now, today we're talking about something that's very exciting, and it's pretty topical right now because we are at the beginning of our fire season. We are going to be talking about wildfire. Now, it's a pretty hot topic, and I got really interested in it, especially a couple of years ago. So in September of 2022, a lightning strike started a wildfire here in Jasper National Park. It happened in the middle of the night, but the smoke was visible by the next day. And although there were helicopters on scene right away bucketing down, it had started in pretty steep and rough terrain. And the conditions were perfect for the fire to spread quite a bit over the next few days. It was really important to start managing things right away because of how close it was to the Jasper town site and to communities outside of the park. The fire became big, pretty fast, and everybody jumped into action right away. Staff took part in helping the fire response team in whatever ways that they could. And one of the jobs that outreach educators got to do was go out around Jasper and talk about what was happening with the fire, the work the fire crews were doing, as well as how fire is managed in national parks. It was a great opportunity to teach visitors and residents about fire and how Parks Canada tackles it. It was also a big group effort with everybody from different departments helping out in whatever way they could. So Parks Canada's fire management program has a few different things that they're responsible for. And one is to, of course, reduce the risk of wildfires that can be dangerous for all of us living in or near national parks. Another is to make sure that they're always ready to respond in case a wildfire does start, just like it did a few years ago and it has in the past as well. And with that particular fire, Parks Canada team members came from all over the country to manage the fire, as well as provincial teams coming to help out too. Now, the third thing that Parks Canada Fire Management Program does is to make sure that at some points fire does still happen, because fire is natural and part of the cycle of nature. Wait, what? So it's not all about putting out fires? Well, it turns out there's a little bit more to the story. A big part of what Parks Canada does is protect and look after Canada's natural and cultural heritage. This includes plants, animals, landscapes, and national historic sites today and for the future. It's a big responsibility, and it's a very cool job. protecting the landscape and looking after the natural heritage of Canada can be a little different than what you think it might look like. There's a thing called ecological integrity that guides the work that Parks Canada does. And I'm going to put it to you, our audience. What do you think ecological integrity means? And I'll give you a few moments to make your guess in the chat. And I know they're big words, but think about what ecological integrity might mean to you.
Nice. Well, Marion, I'll put it out to our YouTubers and StreamYard chat folks if they want to chime in. One of our early ones is wholeness, environmental goodness. We've got creatures thriving. So these are good ideas. I think that possibly coming in through our online chat. Mr. Pettis's class is coming up to try and do it too on StreamYard. We've got no endangered species. These are all things that might link in with what we're talking about. I think these are pretty great answers so far. I'm going to give a few more seconds for anyone who wants to chime in, and then we will learn from Marion what it's all about together. I certainly like our little puzzle piece, Fernie Mountain logo for ecological integrity. That's fantastic. If we get any more, I'll let you know, but this is a great start.
Fantastic. And yeah, all really good answers. So ecological integrity is a fancy way of saying that an ecosystem has all of the pieces it needs to make it work properly. So yeah, goodness, wholeness, all that kind of thing. And that includes both living and non-living things. So plants, animals, insects, fungi, but also the non-living things like rocks, water, wind, sun. And then there's also the natural cycles or processes that make up parts of ecological integrity. So life cycles of animals, cycles of the seasons, these are things that keep an ecosystem healthy. It's not the same all year round. It's important to have the changes of the seasons and all of those cycles of birth, life, and death for animals too. And that does include one piece of the puzzle that's been missing for a while, and that's the natural fire cycle. There is a natural fire cycle, believe it or not, and it is one of those natural processes that keeps the ecosystem whole and that keeps the ecosystem healthy. Here in the Rocky Mountains, fire used to pass through a lot more often than it does these days. And it passed through at different time frames for different areas in the mountain. So for example, where in the valley, where the forest was made of thicker stands of pine and fir, fires would happen roughly between 25 to 90 years. And in the lower subalpine, every 50 to 150 years. Fires in grasslands and more open Douglas fir forests with more open spaces, the fires were more frequent as well. The Indigenous people who've lived here since time immemorial know that fire is a part of the processes necessary to keep the landscape healthy. And I'd like to acknowledge now that Jasper National Park is located in Treaty 6 and 8 territory, as well as the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Assiniboine, Danezah, Nahiawak, Secwepemc, Stoney Nakoda, Mountain Métis, and Métis. We acknowledge the past, present, and future generations of these nations who continue to steward the land. Fire is a part of that stewardship and a tool to keep the landscape healthy. Learning from Indigenous people of these places has helped in the development of Parks Canada's fire management program, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the program. The picture or the ecosystem isn't complete with all those pieces of the puzzle. So, how does fire help the landscape? It's kind of hard to see the good things that it might bring when there's smoke in the air. You can see the flames. It can be quite scary, but you have to wait for it to clear to be able to see the results. So I'm going to put it out to our audience again, to our friends from all across Canada and the States, to give me some ideas of maybe what can be some good things that fire can do for the ecosystem.
Ooh, again, Mr. Pennington's class, if you guys want to chime in on StreamYard from North Hollywood, we'd love to hear from you. YouTubers, this is your chance to chime in as well. How does fire help the landscape? Let's see. Oh, we've got allows new growth, replenish. Those are sort of two sides of the same coin. I like that very much from our audience. We've got, does anyone else want to chime in? Oh, that was nothing. Okay, let's check, see any more answers. Those are good ones. Allowing new growth. Certainly that's what I think of when I think of fire, is if there's dead things, the fire will clear them away and it gives sort of room for new sprouts, new things to come on up. That might be our answer, Marion. Let's stick with that.
Yeah, fantastic. And lots of really good answers, and we'll get into those in some deeper explanation a little bit later on, but absolutely, lots of good things. So, as you know, for a long time, fire was put out immediately in the national parks. Wardens were trained in firefighting and were really good at it. But what happened was those good things that we just talked about were erased from the landscape. So as a result, Jasper National Park looks a lot different these days than it used to before it became a national park in 1907. So take a look at this photo right here. This was taken by a surveyor over 100 years ago. Now we're going to compare it to this one, which was taken in the 1990s. And I'm sure you can see quite a stark difference between the two photos. And I'll bring them side by side so you can get a better look at the comparison. So you can whisper it to the person next to you. How are these pictures different? I'm sure all of you have really remarked on what that difference is. And if you said there's a lot more trees, it's a lot thicker forest in the newer photo, you're absolutely right. That's because, like you said, fire clears out the dead or dying trees, as well as fallen logs and other debris that's gathered over the years, and it clears space for new growth. So excellent work, everybody in the chat. We'll bring that up a little bit bigger so you can really see how thick that forest has become over the years that fire was suppressed in the national park. In this picture, you can see there's a lot of trees as well. And a lot of them are the same kind of tree, mostly lodgepole pine. And a lot of them are the same age. Now, is that a healthy ecosystem? Is that a healthy forest if everything is exactly the same? And if you said, not really, and we need some variety, well, you're right. It's important for forests to be like mosaics. If you have all tiles of one single color, one single shape, that's a pretty boring image, isn't it? It's not interesting. It's only when you have a variety of tiles in different colors and maybe even shapes that you get a cool picture. And it's that way with forests too. There needs to be a variety of different plants, different animals. Everyone's got their niche to have a healthy ecological integrity in the ecosystem. So I mentioned before, there's a lot of the same kind of trees. They're all around the same age. And for lodgepole pines, they're starting to get a little bit old. There's a bug as well that can be found in Jasper that loves to dig under the bark of lodgepole pine trees. And it's called the mountain pine beetle. And the mountain pine beetle, over the last few years, kind of had a field day in Jasper and the surrounding area. They dig under the bark to lay their eggs, and they bring a fungus with them as well. So younger trees, they're healthier, and some might be able to fight off the beetle. And you can see all of the beetle tracks, beetle tunnels underneath the bark in this picture here. But the older trees don't have as much luck. The beetle and the fungus that comes with it eventually killed a lot of the older pine trees in Jasper. So you can see they went from green to red. The reason so many of the pine trees are the same age is that lodgepole pines actually need fire, or at least a good dose of heat to be able to spread their seeds. Lodgepole pines have what are called serotinous cones. So that basically means that they're glued together until a strong enough source of heat is able to open them. So some cones will open on their own, but others will need fire to open up and be able to disperse those seeds and produce new growth. So here's a video that actually shows you that process. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that it's really, really glued together at first, especially at the base where it's not as much in the flames. But if we zoom in closer, you can see the heat of the flame and the fire is actually starting to cause the cone to open up. And that way, the seeds are able to come out and able to spread and create new growth and new trees that will grow. It's pretty cool. Other trees besides the lodgepole pines have also evolved to go along with fire, but in different ways. So this is a picture of Douglas fir bark. So Douglas fir trees have really, really thick bark, which works to protect the tree from fire. Lots of old living Douglas fir trees have fire scars from old fires that passed through a long time ago, but they were able to survive thanks to that thick layer of bark that protected their trunk, and they were able to continue to grow. Fire is also helpful because it helps to create more open spaces. We talked about that when I asked you that question. It creates open spaces between trees and large open areas like meadows. So lots of delicious plants and growth. Plants that like sunshine have a hard time when the trees are too thick because it blocks the sunlight. When fires go through and clear the space, the sun-loving plants are able to get the light and the nutrients that they need. Not only that, but when fires burn more frequently, they're not as hot, and the ash from the fire puts a lot of nutrients back into the soil for healthier plants. This here is actually a picture of new growth that popped up only 5 days after a fire went through the area. It starts to regenerate so much more quickly than you would think. Animals like bears and elk love grazing in open spaces. They really appreciate the delicious berries the bears do, like buffalo berries that grow really big and juicy in sunlight. And birds appreciate the fact that insects like to make their home in the trunks of the burnt trees. It's an all-you-can-eat bug buffet. The open space also makes it easier for animals to move through the area, and the elk and the bighorn sheep and the other grazers can graze on the grasses that grow in the meadows between the trees. So we've gone over so many things that fire is helpful for plants and for animals, and so why was it stopped for so long? Well, as we know from big forest fires, wildfires, like the one that Chetamon fire that happened in 2022, although fire can be a good thing, it's still dangerous to people and buildings. And as settlers arrived in Canada from Europe in the early 1800s, they worried that fires would destroy their homes and their livelihoods. And so fires were quickly put out. After the first national parks were created in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Canadian Park Service hired fire and game guardians who were in charge of extinguishing or putting out fires within the parks. And over time, the tools to put out fires became much more effective. So we went from this old fire truck to the modern ones we see today, and these firefighting tools to the much more effective hoses and systems that we have today to fight fires. But as time went on, without fire swooping through to clean up the forest, it continued to grow and become cluttered with old, dead, and dying trees. And also, those old fallen trees make good fuel, and so the risk of higher intensity fire increased. Close to 100 years later, Parks Canada fire managers were beginning to realize the negative results of not allowing the fire to burn in the national parks. But the question was, at this point, how to restore the balance by reintroducing fire. How to do it? Could it be through waiting for a natural wildfire to start and just letting it burn? But what about the dangers to people and to towns if it gets too big or too close? You know, how to control something that by definition is wild? And this is where the idea of prescribed fire comes in. A prescribed fire is a fire that is lit on purpose, but under very controlled circumstances. It's to use to achieve a goal like forest health. A prescribed fire for the landscape is like a doctor writing a prescription for a human. Doctors diagnose people with an illness and prescribe medicine to make them better, with careful instructions on how to use the medicine properly. They do a lot of research in the scientific community to make sure that it's safe for people and that they know how to use the medication properly. Fire managers also do a lot of preparation, research, and planning and consultation before a prescribed fire is lit. And sometimes they have to wait years for the right conditions. I mentioned before that Indigenous people have known about the good things fire brings and have been doing cultural burns for a long time, longer than Parks Canada has existed. So they have a lot of knowledge and experience, and it's important to learn from one another to help bring fire back to the landscape. It creates healthy forests and grasslands, enhances habitat for wildlife, and reduces the risk of wildfire. So it's an important part of the process. The first prescribed fire in the national parks was lit in Banff in the 1980s. So Parks Canada has nearly 40 years experience using fire to naturally restore ecological integrity in national parks. But it's not as simple as lighting a match and just letting it burn. The members of Parks Canada's fire crews are highly trained professionals. This is a don't try this at home, folks moment. They even have specialized equipment to use for different situations. So this right here is a drip torch. It's a handheld can with a mixture of gasoline and diesel for fires that aren't going to burn super hot or for starting grass fires. Drip torches are only used where it is safe to have people in the area. Fire crews use these when they're looking to burn away deadfall and undergrowth of the forest or a grassland fire burning from the ground up. And again, only when the conditions are right and when it is safe and when there's lots of systems in place to protect the people and the environment. Another tool in the tool belt of Parks Canada fire crews is the ignition sphere. It looks like a ping pong ball, but it's filled with a chemical called potassium permanganate. And they're loaded into a machine which injects them with another chemical, and that starts a chemical reaction. So they're then dropped from a helicopter and they have a delayed reaction before they burst into flames as they fall away. They're useful for starting fires in large areas and where terrain might be too difficult or unsafe to have people on the ground. And then there's the heli-torch. Hanging from this helicopter is a much larger version of the drip torch, and this is used to start fires in the crowns of the trees. The machine is filled with a gel fuel that sticks to the tops of the trees and will light the canopy on fire as it swings through. All of these tools, again, are used by professionals with years of experience and training, and only in the proper conditions. Most prescribed fires are done in the spring and the fall when the weather is cooler and when there's a higher chance of rain or snow to help put out the fire. Lots of planning is done ahead of time. Prescribed fire is used for a few different things, and we've talked about how important fire is for the landscape. So fire is used to restore open meadows and increase the diversity of plant species. Prescribed fire is also often used as a fire guard to protect places where people live, and sometimes it's used for both. In either case, fire managers always look at the history of fire in an area to find out how often there was fire and how severe the fires were to understand what the cycle was like, and then to reintroduce it for that ecological integrity. And the protection of places like Jasper. And this is a picture right here of Jasper, and there's an image of a fire break, so a natural break in that forest to help protect the town site. If it's not safe to burn in a certain area, fire crews sometimes instead create these fire guards or fire breaks by removing the fuel manually that could cause a fire to spread into places where people live. So the fire break above Jasper was actually also done with manual tools to protect the town site. It basically means that dead and dying trees are cut down to make space so it's harder for fire to spread quickly. And each year, if the conditions are right, Parks Canada will try and do a few prescribed fires. It takes a lot of work, planning, and on-the-ground support to be able to do a prescribed fire. And fire is, after all, still dangerous. However, when it's used properly, it can play its natural role in clearing those dead and dying trees and other plants, putting nutrients back into the soil, opening forests and meadows for different species of plants to grow and to live, and for wildlife to thrive as well. And, of course, reducing the risk of severe wildfires. Like any tool, it's important to know how to use it properly and give it the respect that it deserves. But once fire has done its job, the effects on the landscape are clear to see. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much for all of your fantastic answers. Yeah. And I look forward to some of your questions for me.
Well, thank you so much, Marion, and for the awesome final shot in the slide deck too. So cool. That firefighter is that's like front of the LinkedIn page. Marion, our first question's coming in, and I want to note for our live class, North Hollywood, we will come to you guys if you got some questions for us. YouTubers, get those questions in. One of our first ones is, how many fires were in Jasper or in the parks in Alberta last year?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but there were at least there were a few in Jasper. I think there were at least 3 that the fire crews responded to minimum in Jasper last year. And then, of course, there were all of those fires in Alberta near Edson, and then up north near Wood Buffalo National Park as well. I believe there are some sites that will tell you. I know in British Columbia, there's Wildfire BC that has like a map of what fires are currently burning and what fires are in control. And I believe Alberta also has that same thing. So if you look online, you'll be able to find information on that.
Yeah. It's something that we're sort of the kids in our classes, you're really used to this now, whether you're in California, Alberta, Ontario, fires all the time. When I was a kid, fires very, like they happened, but nowhere near to the degree that they do now, both in ferocity and scale and number. It's a direct testament to climate change that is the case. And it's something that we really do have to spend a lot of money and time investing in preventing it, impacting people, habitats, and more. So that's a great first question, guys. Mr. Penix in North Hollywood, unmute your mic, come on in and take us away. Hey, guys, welcome in. Hi, hello. You're in, but I'm not sure your mic is working even though it's on. Oh, no. Half the fun. Something should go a little bit wrong. Guys, I don't think your mic's working. I truly don't, and I'm really sorry for that, but we'll say hi. And if you want to play around with it, I can come back in a minute. Type your question in the chat. I know you've already been doing things in the chat, and if we get it, that's great, but we'll say hi to our student that's got a question. While we're waiting for you to get that question in the chat, we'll take another one from YouTube. How expensive is it to create these fire breaks? You showed this sort of heavy-duty machinery, lots of people on the go. Looks like a big undertaking. What's the deal?
That's a question for the finance department. It can be expensive, and you've stumped me. I don't actually know because again, I don't work in the finance. There's so many different departments in Parks Canada, and so I'd have to send an email or a message to our finance manager to find out that.
No, but I really like that question. And I mean, this is the reason that we invest so much is that if we don't invest that much and it does impact the town, it is way, way more money to deal with something that's already happened. Like proactive work to save these places is huge. And so I think it's something that's well worth the investment whether we're talking about Alberta or California, Ontario, whatever. These things really do go a long way. Yeah.
And that is the idea. Like it's that balance. You know, you look at the cost of preventative measures versus the cost of what would happen if it came through and all of this infrastructure was destroyed. And if it's less than the cost of replacing all of that infrastructure, then it's worth doing.
Certainly is. A question we get every time we do a wildfire program. So when we're setting these prescribed burns, how do we protect the wildlife? Is there a way that Parks Canada tries to make sure that there aren't creatures that are caught in those sort of burns, or what's going on?
Well, honestly, animals are pretty good at figuring out that a fire is happening, whether that's prescribed fire or whether it's wildfire. And, you know, there's a lot of activity in the area beforehand. So there's a lot of setup. You've got to bring out the hoses, the water, all that kind of thing to make sure. So there's a lot of activity happening in the area before the prescribed fire is started. So the animals kind of have an idea that something's going on. And in the case of wildfire, their noses are really good. They have really good senses. Unfortunately, of course, there always are some that do get caught in wildfires, but animals are able to, if they burrow, they're able to burrow underground to safety. If they're able to fly, they're able to fly away. They're able to run, they go to another spot.
Yeah.
So animals are.
Well, and as you said, sorry, you're doing so much work in advance. Like the animals want nothing to do with people. When a large number of machines come and people come, the animals are gone. They're over the horizon. This is true in Alberta. It's true all over the world. We hear this from all our scientists that do ecology things. The challenge is never too many animals. It's too few because we are very scary to a lot of creatures. So great question, guys. All right, North Hollywood, we're going to check your mic one more time. See? Yes. Yes.
Okay, Anthony, you ready?
Cool, come on up. Way to go.
What happens if you plan ahead but nothing happens?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a good question. So, you know, we can do as much planning as we want in ahead of time, but if the conditions aren't right, then it doesn't happen. The fire is not set. and they have to wait for another year for another opportunity. And that's happened a few times where there have been prescribed fires that the fire management team wants to do, but because the conditions aren't right for that particular year or that time of year, there's too much wind or it's not there's not enough humidity, then just nothing happens and we wait for another opportunity.
Yeah. I love this question on YouTube. Do you also fight wildfires or just start them?
Absolutely, 100%. Honestly, a really, really, really big part of the job of the fire management team is fighting those wildfires, especially when it's close to infrastructure, close to people. The priority is always people. Priority is always, always, always people's safety, especially the fire team as well, the people with boots on the ground. So they do, and they have. Last summer, we're fighting a lot of fires in the park and elsewhere. We actually had some teams that went earlier this season, went up north to help fight wildfires near Wood Buffalo. So yes, absolutely, that is a huge part of the work. Especially there's different zones that are designated in the park. And the high priority zones are the ones where immediately the response is on, everybody's on it, boots on the ground, helicopters, everything is happening to combat that fire. Then there's some areas where they'll monitor it very, very closely and combat it if it reaches a certain level. And there are some areas in the park where, again, monitoring it very, very closely, but we'll see if it's able to let it burn and continue to have that natural fire cycle process impact the landscape in the ways that it's supposed to. But absolutely, definitely, 100%, lots of firefighting.
That's funny. We're going to take one more from YouTube, and then we're going to go back to Mr. Pedersen's class, and then time flies and you're having fun. So we're going to take those couple more questions before we wrap up together for what has been a great start to an environment week. Ms. McDonald's class wants to know, what's the biggest fire you fought? A nice follow-up to our last one.
Oh, that's a really good question. So myself, I'm not part of the fire management team in Jasper. I did do my wildland firefighter training type 2, so assisting, but I haven't been deployed at this point. So I haven't personally fought any fires up to this point. The biggest one that I've experienced personally was that Chettaman fire in 2022. But as for the Parks Canada team here in Jasper, I think the Syncline fire that happened in the mid-2010s was bigger. Yeah.
It's, again, you can find information about the scale of these fires, the number of them, all online. That's fairly easy to find, and it's tricky to pull up at whim. So I'm glad we're getting these questions. Thanks, guys. Mr. Pedersen's class, we're going to come back to you with your working microphone to wrap us up today in North Hollywood. A big thank you to all our audience. And again, check out our Environment Week listing. Everything that we do is going to YouTube. Oceans Week this week as well. So much more to explore and discover if you're keen on programs to wrap up the school year. But North Hollywood, come on in and take us away. Hey. Hi.
Sometimes I see water makes fire increase. How is that possible?
Oh, could you repeat that just a little bit? With fire and water mixed together? Is that what you're asking about?
Sometimes I see water makes. Sometimes I see water. Sometimes I see water makes fire increase. How is that possible?
Oh, that's a good question. So it depends on the type of the fire. So it depends on the fuel. So fire needs 3 things to burn. It needs oxygen, it needs fuel, and it needs a heat source or a spark. And when fire is increased by adding water, that means the fuel is usually some type of oil, because oil and water don't mix. So if you, for example, have a kitchen fire and you know it's an oil fire, usually what we do for fighting fires is to try and cut off the heat source. Or in the case of fire breaks, it's getting rid of the fuel. In the case of oil fires, what's important to do is cut off the oxygen if possible. So for oil fires, the water does make it worse. But what you want to do is carefully and slowly, not right away, but try and slide a lid over top of the pan, especially if it's a fire in a pan, to cut off the oxygen to put it out. So that's a case where water makes fire worse. It's when it's oil or some other similar fuel.
I'm glad you highlighted that. This is not something that we experience in our forest fires very often, or at least it's a bit of a different setup. But I'm glad we got that one. I don't think we've ever had that question in one of our broadcasts before. Folks, thank you all so much. I want to leave Marion for one final minute just to see if there's any last message you want to leave us with before we wrap up today's broadcast on wildfire. But I want to express a big thank you to her for joining us, and we will bring in Mr. Pettix's class to say the same in a minute as well. But any final leaving message for wildfire? Anything we want to leave our kids with today?
I just want to encourage you to learn as much as you can about nature and the environment, and stay curious, keep asking questions, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Marion. And if you're at home on YouTube and you want to scream and yell and annoy the principal, you're welcome to do that too. Mr. Pettix in the class, I'll bring you guys in to say thank you and goodbye as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.